Hi, everyone. This is Jen Mark with Buzzcast podcast for the Ontario Athletic Therapists Association. I am so happy today to introduce Jeremy Cross from the Coaches Association of Ontario. Jeremy is the current Executive Director of the Coaches Association of Ontario and has been with the organization since 2006. Jeremy is a basketball coach with a local club here in Toronto, alumni of the University of Waterloo, and before joining the CAO, Jeremy spent time with MLSE, University of Waterloo Athletics, and the Orlando Magic, and has one of the Canadian senior men's national basketball team managers from 2006 to 2016. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thank you so much for having me, Jen. Great to be here.
It's so nice to have you here and talking about this new initiative. We are seeing so many girls and women involved in sports kind of rallying around, we especially from the Olympics and so many sports, so many different sports, taking action on sexual predatory contact. And the Coaches Association is taking a lead role here to promote safe sport. Talk to me a little bit about how this came about and what we're talking about today.
Yeah, for sure. And as recent as yesterday with Christine Sinclair and the 6-minute solidarity time, right? So, yeah, there's sadly cases around the sports system. So, where it kind of comes historically is, we do all have a role to safeguard sport, and that's gonna, I think, definitely be a theme in today's podcast. Is everyone has a role to play, including athletic therapists. Coaches associations, both nationally and provincially, have a massive role to play in safety, like we all do. So, our area is kind of with coaching development and coaching education, it cuts across all contexts, whether you're talking grassroots, whether you're talking high performance, whether you're working in a community. Coaches are in all of those contexts, and you don't necessarily have sport if you don't have coaches. So we have a huge role to play. Our principles are based in ethics. They're based in respect, in integrity, responsibility, relationships, building those relationships. But ultimately, we want to do this so that coaches keep athletes safe and provide those education development services to support them. And we're still committed to that today. So the background to this leadership space as it relates to safe sport, it goes back really to that 2019 CBC reported on the convicted sex offenses over the past 20 years. And that article called for a massive reform in the sports system. It empowered voices. It was right around the same time as the Me Too movement, and really a demand to safeguard sport, and especially the athletes who were ultimately doing this for. So that reform kickstarted some funding from the federal government, and they targeted and tasked Coaching Association of Canada, that's our national body, we're a delivery agent of them, to go out and start really pushing the envelope as it relates to this. And they ran 13 provincial territorial summits and national summit. They produced a number of reports, did consultations. Action steps were the Universal Code of Conduct, an independent mechanism in this country at the national level to handle complaints, reporting, sanctioning, resources, education, training, but all for national levels. So there was research involved and all sorts of things, but really we want to drive change and evolve our profession. Provincially, we're a big part of the system, and we know that we have an important role to do that for the safety of Ontarians. So we want to filter those outputs down into the provincial level, align with context, make sure we harmonize a little bit as much as we can of the codes, the policies, the processes, promote and advocate for change ultimately.
Yeah, so talk to me a little bit more about the training program.
Sure. So as I mentioned, the code was one of the outputs. And one of the key elements of the training is that code of conduct. So the goal of the training is to prevent and address abuse and harassment. There's a number of principles within the training. Canadian Center for Ethics in Sport was the ones who were required to put the code together based off of the principles. And then ultimately, the training was put in place that focuses on, power dynamics, maltreatment, and all the definitions of maltreatment that covers like the forms of it and the rules around maltreatment, the processes involved. It covers things on culture, evolving our practices, the mandated requirements at the national level. One thing that's really cool about it is it also gets into reporting, because the code covers things around reporting and duty to report, failure to report, and falsifying allegations. The code also gets into sanctioning. So there's so much in the training, but it is all really based out of the Universal Code of Conduct for Maltreatment in Sport. So it's a way to take the code, which is a massive document, and complicated in its writing, and put it into a training that's consumable by the end users. And the greatest thing about the training too is it's been written in multiple versions. So whether you're a coach, you're an athlete, you're a parent, you're an administrator, you're a technical leader, there's a scenario or a version of the training for you. So it really makes it appropriate for your context that you're supporting the sport system. So, and the greatest thing about it, it's free. You don't actually have to pay for this training. So it's a really great investment by the federal government and the leadership by CAC to put it in play, and then our role to push it out to the sector. So
that's great. I love the different aspects, because everybody has a different eye on what's going on, and different, as you say, a different role to play and a different perception, I think, of what's happening.
No doubt. Yes. There's definitely lots of different roles out there, and like the athletic therapist role, I think, is, they have a huge role to play. They are 100% connected to athletes in a unique way, unlike a coach is, unlike a peer is, unlike an administrator. The athletic therapist relationship is huge, but with that comes some responsibility. So, the role for them is similar to everybody. If you see something, you have to say something. You have to be aware of the rules. You have to understand what rule of two is and things like that. And when I think about the role of like the athletic therapist and like, a couple of like little kind of stories, Allison Forsyth is a former Olympian alpine skier, and quite well known because she tells her story, and it's a very honest and forthcoming story of her story of sexual abuse in her sport. But she also talks about it and tells the story of how she came to share her story, and it was with an athletic therapist in a training room when she was getting treatment. And that person didn't just stay quiet or tell her to stay quiet. She supported her, she empowered her, and encouraged her to do something about it. And she's been a huge leader in this movement. And then I also, as you mentioned in the bio, like I've worked with the national team for 11 years, and I got to see that relationship. There is a level of trust that an athlete has with a therapist that is so unbelievable. They confide in them. They would be willing to travel all over the world essentially to get treatment from athletic therapists. Like that's a huge level of respect and trust, but that also does have a power dynamic associated to it. So with that comes so much responsibility to support their well-being and make sure that they're safe in their daily training environment. So, athletic therapists have such a massive, massive role.
I think there's something to that as well. It just, when you're doing the training, to recognize things that you think is safe, but maybe someone else has a perception that isn't safe, whether that's the athlete or a bystander, or just recognizing that.
Yeah, and that's why the training is so important, because it actually does start to go through scenarios. It talks about, the definitions. So what are all the definitions of maltreatment? And then how do you understand the rules around them? So, and there's also the whole conversation around age of majority and age of consent, and minors versus adults, and they all have their nuances, but what the training does is actually get into that level of detail to start to help clarify how we need to be operating, how we need to evolve to ensure that everyone is staying safe. and we are safeguarding the people in the sport as well as the system.
What's the duty of everyone involved supporting sport to ensure our athletes are protected from predatory practices?
Yeah, we all have a duty. It's in the report, it's in the code. Safeguarding sports, safeguarding athletes, safeguarding the leaders, that's definitely really, really important. So the Universal Code does have an entire reporting section. It talks about your responsibilities to report, what happens if you fail to report, what happens if your allegations are false, and things like that, and ensuring that those types of things are outlined in the code. We do have a duty to report. That is a requirement of all people. If you see something, you have to say something. And failure to do so does come with serious ramifications, and that is applicable to both the minors and the adults when there's a power dynamic. So action steps are included in the training. So we don't just give you the training of what to look for. The training also says the entire last section of the training is about action. And here are the resources. Right. Here are your go-to spots for, putting in a claim or a complaint, or I saw something, and how do you go about doing that? So, and over the last few years, those outlets have become more well-known, and this training will help to clarify those outlets for when something happens.
That's great. How do you think these new policies and guidelines will be embraced?
So I do feel nationally it's already happening. Like in April of 2020, they implemented the training piece and the implementation piece, and I think I heard somewhere in the ballpark of 20 some odd thousand people took it in the first month or two. So like, I do feel like it is needed. There is a very big conversation about it, and people have to do it. Provincially, I do feel like because of the work that was being done nationally to get the Universal Code done, to get the independent mechanism in place, which only happened in April of 2021, all of that trickle down now has to make its way, not just for the national level programs, but has to start to make its way into the provincial level programs. So across the country, I would say provincially, we're all at different places. We're all at different parts of implementing something, whether that's an independent body or a governmental oversight or resources provided by an organization, or figuring out how we're going to navigate it. In this province, I certainly know in Ontario that the government here has a very big interest in safety. When we hear them make announcements about Canada's Summer Games in Niagara, it's going to be the safest games ever. There's a lot, and that was actually said before the pandemic. So we're not just talking about, their interest right now is obviously infectious disease controls and everything around regulations and guidelines, return to play, team sport, non-contact, contact, and getting everybody back into action. We also hear them talk about mental health, and the interests there are quite current because of the nature of what we're dealing with right now, and developing mental health resources, and a recent announcement around what that's going to help do for amateur youth sports. So there's some things there. And then of course, we've got Rowan's Law. Like Rowan's Law is an amazing example of legislation that already exists going back to 2016, and that implementation process is still ongoing. So there is some precedent where a code of conduct has been put in place for athletes under 26 and parents under the age of 18, and coaches, trainers, officials, all having to agree to reviewing resources, reviewing a code of conduct, and removal of play and return to sport protocols. So like, we do have something to build off of. We've got lessons learned in that kind of, how is it going to be adopted by our province? I don't know right now. It remains to be seen, but it certainly seems like a really important topic for the government based on all the other things that I see them putting time into and thought into as it relates to the big, huge, overarching umbrella topic of safety.
So with that, you think that there might be a possibility of something like this being legislated in Ontario, or at least the framework is there?
I don't know, but I certainly believe that an investigation and a discussion with all stakeholders in the entire system in Ontario needs to happen for sure. So I don't know the answer to that, but I would certainly be supportive of a conversation and discussion and a further investigation into what a mechanism in Ontario could look like that was really supportive of our provincial governing sport bodies.
Yeah, that's great. Anything else you'd like to say about athletic therapy and their role in providing more safe sport?
Yeah, like first, just big time commending to Ontario Athletic Therapists Association. You know, their initiative to do this is amazing. Taking the stand is really important, but they've also done it with efficiency and alignment in mind. So one of the really cool things to reiterate for the ATs is that the requirement at the national level, many of the ATs in Ontario already are working at a national level. So we're not asking them to go and do a requirement for the national team, and then the OATA is saying, well, also go and do this one. They're the same program. Right. So we're not building something new because it'll fit us better. We're not, wasting resources or creating more duplication in the system. We're using something that already is current, it's maintained, it's invested in by the CAC, it's sustainable, and the best of all, that it is free. So like they've really done a really good thing there for sure. And then just lastly, like the Coaches Association of Ontario is obviously really invested in coaches, but ATs are so important to supporting coaches in their work. So that's why we're really with OATA. And you know what, like as the ATs get out there to take this training, please feel free to reach out to the Coaches Association of Ontario or the CAC services, because we're here to help you. And we want to make sure that any navigation that you're trying to find or had questions you have around the safe sport material or the training, please feel free to reach out to us, and head to the locker.coach.ca to take the training.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Jeremy. I know life is busy, and it's such a great initiative, and we really appreciate your help with this.
No, my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, Jen.
This is Jen Mark for Buzzcast podcast for the Ontario Athletic Therapists Association. Have a great day, everyone.